I'm Craig Johnson, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
I love my job. I get to talk to Craig Johnson. How cool is this? I've been on the show before, and don't know what Craig does. You go into Netflix, and Longmire is probably one of the top shows they always push your way, and those are Craig's stories, and it's incredible. I have on his debut appearance. Debut, right? Hunter, you've not been on the show before, have you?
I've not been on the Break It Down show. I've been on a lot of other things, but not this.
Welcome to the Break It Down show. Hunter's going to do a lot of the driving and question asking today. We're definitely going to talk about Craig's new book, but I'm going to let Hunter do some introducing himself and some talking, and I'm going to get out of the way. We're going to have a great show.
Yeah, I will also get out of the way so we can talk to Craig Johnson. But I am Dean of Arts and Sciences at Union University in Tennessee. And but more important for our purposes, I am a big fan of Craig Johnson and of Longmire. In fact, Craig, it's funny, before this opportunity came up, I thought about you every day anyway, because, I've bought a lot of the books. I have, many of the books. And we had a designer do one of the rooms in our house, and she went into the library and she found all the Longmire books and she arranged them, in the room that we were redecorating. I guess she liked the way they looked.
Well, good. I'll tell Viking Penguin. They'll be very pleased.
That's right. So they're in a place of honor. Okay, so let me kind of begin. First of all, I am one of the readers, and I think there are probably many who came through the TV show, right? I kind of began by watching on A&E and then on Netflix. And at some point, I thought to myself, I think I need to read these books because I like the show so much. And so, I have a lot of friends who are big readers. And one of them said to me, okay, so yes, you're going to enjoy these books. These books are great. But I need to prepare you for the fact that Longmire is not the same as he is on the television show. So what I wonder is, what kind of reactions do you get from people who have seen the show and then they read the books?
Well, it's funny because I just, whenever anybody asks me that question, I always think about, there's a specific quote that I used to give like that whenever people would ask about Walt. Because I would refer to him as the sadder but wiser sheriff. He's got some things going for him like that, but some things maybe not quite so much. He's a little overweight, he's a little overage, he's a little overly depressed, and all of that like that. But the way I referred to him is that I was trying to come up with a protagonist that wasn't the usual crime fiction protagonist, which I describe as the 6'2" of twisted steel and sex appeal. Every woman wanted him. Every man feared him. He could kill anyone with a number 2 Ticonderoga pencil in 3.2 seconds. And I hate that guy more than any other character in literature like that or film like that, because I don't think it's particularly realistic. I mean, maybe in the Marvel universe like that, but for the rest of us here as carbon-based life forms, most generally, that's not the guys that are out there doing the job. They just don't look like Hugh Jackman or that type of thing like that. And so I just thought, okay, well, maybe, Walt would be a little bit different now. And I gave him some, abilities like that, and then also made him, a little bit overly large, just simply because that generally tends to be the type of person that gets the jobs, out in the West. If you're a sheriff of a county the size of, Maryland, and you've only got a staff of maybe 6 deputies, most generally you're answering calls on your own. There isn't going to be any backup. You're going to have to take care of this yourself. And so in the books, Walt is like 6'5", and weighs like about 250, 260 some pounds. He was an offensive lineman for USC. When they played in a Rose Bowl. He was a Marine investigator in Vietnam. He's a very, very capable guy, but not exactly what I would call a print ad, is what I would refer to him as. So that's a little bit of the difference like that. And then along comes Robert Taylor, who plays Walt Longmire, and Robert, thank goodness, is not the be all end all of a Vogue model, but from what female viewers tell me, he's kind of easy on the eyes, including my wife, I might add, like that. And he's got some. The great thing about him is he's got some lines in his face. He's got some mileage on him. He's got that deep voice like that, and he's a pretty good sized guy anyway, like that. And so he fit the role very well like that, but he certainly was more palatable, I think, for a television audience than the Walt that I had, kind of in my head. But that's okay. Like, I kind of look at those two entities, both the book series and the television series, as two separate but equal universes. They both have their strengths and their weaknesses, like that, but I'm always going to think that the books are going to have a little bit more of an advantage, just simply because of the material, the amount of material. I mean, it's very hard for a 42-minute teleplay to compete with a 350 or 400-page book. You're always going to have a lot more material there to work with, and so I think they both have advantages. Obviously, Hollywood and TV and all of that, with the visual imagery and the movie stars and all of that, and the special effects and the costuming and the props, and the locations and all that kind of stuff, have an advantage like that. But the books are always going to have a little bit more of an advantage, because I do have that one secret weapon, which is called the reader's imagination. And they're able to imply everything that they want in the books, and have the books be exactly what it is that they wish to see, which is kind of hard to argue with.
Another thing that that the person who sort of introduced me to the books kind of said is that the Walt in the books has a sense of humor. Right? I mean, that's a pretty substantial difference. Robert Taylor's Walt he's a pretty grim character, right?
Yeah, and that's not particularly Robert's fault, because Robert is actually a very, very accomplished, comedic actor. He's funny as he can be in real life, and then also, if you've seen him, in a lot of the things that he's done, he's got incredible comic timing and presence, And so I think what happened is though the die was kind of set when we were on basic cable on A&E. And they had a very strong feeling that this was a police procedural and should be 42 minutes long. And the difficulty being that, I would, as a creative consultant, I would look at the scripts that they would have, which had a lot of humor in them. They had a lot of humor in them. The difficulty being, though, that in 42 minutes, you don't have a lot of spare time, for anything that isn't completely about the case and completely about the main plot, of each episode. And so they kind of cast the die for what it is that the TV show was going to be with A&E. It loosened up a little bit whenever we made the jump, to Netflix, because Netflix gave us another 15, 20 minutes, of time in which, to do the shows. And so you see a lot more humor in the last 3 seasons than you do in the first 3 seasons. But it was heart-wrenching for me like that, because I would read those original scripts and there would be some hilarious scenes, really, really funny stuff like that got cut. Every time they would, get back to the studio, they would be cutting those parts out because it didn't fit into that 42-minute format, which was too bad. Because I think that, it took away an awful lot, I think, from the characters and also from the performances, I think that a lot of the actors put into it.
So where is it for you that Walt's sense of humor comes from? Because in the books, to me, that's actually a pretty significant feature of who Walt is.
Thank you. And I have to tell you this is really a marvelous interview, because I rarely get to talk about this particular aspect of the characters and of the writing like that, because, inevitably, somebody will ask me, in a Q&A or in an interview or something, and I'll say, what makes your books different from, a lot of the other, mystery and crime fiction that's out there? And I'll, meander around and try and give an answer like that. And then as soon as I get off of the interview like that, my wife will look at me and she'll go, humor is the big thing like that. There's so much humor in the books like that. And that, that just is sometimes a thing that's an awful lot of the time missing like that. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, I did a lot of studying like that, to see exactly how the characters, would respond to these different issues. And I think that, whenever I get responses back, from a lot of law enforcement, the biggest thing they're always talking about is the humor that's in the books. Like, I'm doing the keynote speech for the Western Sheriff's Association meeting in Reno here this year, like that. And, a lot of sheriffs, a lot of deputies, a lot of highway patrolmen, a lot of police officers, detectives, everybody, they really like the books because of the humor. That's the one thing that they can consistently say over and over and over again. The thing that you get right, so well like that, and so enjoyable is that humor. And for me, I don't know if I'd know any other way of writing. I would have a real problem if I had to write, I guess, some kind of really dire grim, noirish, there is no hope. We're all going to die, life and resistance is useless and all that kind of thing. I would find that funny and try and make fun of that. To me, the humor is one of the things that's more important than a bulletproof vest. That'll get you through the day, better than any good backup. I mean, you need that humor because you see people at their best, but you also see people at their worst. And so, you need to find a way to, keep yourself alive, to keep your soul alive, to keep your head alive, to keep your sense of humor alive.
Related to the humor, I think about the relationship between Walt and Henry, because there's a certain kind of comic dynamic between those two as well, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, so within the detective genre, I think about a couple like I've read a lot of James Lee Burke's novels.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got kind of his Dave Robichaux, and then I'm trying to remember the name of his sidekick, who is sort of this incredibly violent trump card, right? and I think about with your stories, Henry could be set up that way. I mean, the way you portray him, he seems like a much more formidable physical character than, say, the Lou Diamond Phillips version, right? Not to criticize Lou Diamond Phillips, who's a magnificent actor,
not at all.
But he's not the Henry that I see in the books.
No, the Henry in the books is truly a formidable individual.
Yeah.
Like that. And the one thing I guard against, very carefully is making sure that Henry is not some sort of a moral default, for Henry. A mistake I see an awful lot of writers doing is that they want to put these horrible things in the book, but they don't want their main character to be responsible for these horrible things, and so they give them some sort of sidekick, and then that sidekick gets to do all the really horrible things like that you don't want to have your protagonist do. And I don't like that kind of writing. I find it to be kind of cheesy, like that you're using that character as a moral default, like that. And I think that Henry, in many ways, has, a stronger moral sense, maybe in some issues than Walt does. And so I think it makes for a much more formidable individual. I think it also makes for a much more complex relationship, between Walt and Henry, since, they are kind of like paragons of, two different cultures, from the high plains. I mean, the two major cultures that we have here, are both the native culture, like that, and then the mainstream white culture. And it's fun for me, to try and play with those strengths and weaknesses that both of those individuals have, like that. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the series is based off of relationships, and one of the biggest relationships in there, of course, is that relationship between Walt and Henry that comes to the fore so many times with what it is that I'm writing. And I hope that will continue. Because as that relationship continues and evolves, just like all of the other relationships in the books, that they become more and more complex as time goes by.
Yeah. Actually, as I think about it, and I think about Henry, I think you've achieved something. So, for example, with some novels and films, you will have a critique from African Americans that there's a character who is like the magical Negro, that like in the Legend of Bagger Vance or
Right,
something like that.
Right.
It could be very easy for Henry to be the magical Indian, right? Or the wise man or whatever else, but he's not, right? He is a much more fully drawn character than that.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, and I can understand, why it is that because you see those kind of tropes and those kind of characters, over and over and over again, and it's just insulting, is what it is. Rather than trying to come up, with a multidimensional, kind of character that would have, so many facets, to who they are and what they believe, their belief systems and their morality and all of these things. Instead, it's easier to fall back, and make them a Disney character. And I'd much rather see a fully developed character than just a plot device, with an ethnicity slapped on top of it. It's kind of horrible, really, when you get right down to it. But thank you very much.
Do you ever hear from Native Americans about the stories or the way things are presented?
Oh yeah, I mean, my ranch is just to the south of the Northern Cheyenne and the Crow Reservation. And so I've got friends and neighbors and family that are up on the res. And so I've been extraordinarily fortunate that I had a number of fellows that I could use as entrees, like, into that culture, like that. And so they kind of gave me, a little bit of an ability to step in and ask questions, of people who normally, might be a little reticent, like, because, they've been abused, so many times, especially, in the media like that, and in, art, in books and movies and television and all of that like that. But over the years, of course, like that's kind of expanded. So now that if I have any questions or if there's anything I want to know, there are people that I can go to, immediately to give me the answers for that. And the books, have an extraordinary following, up on the res. The television show does. It's kind of a close knit kind of relationship in many ways. I mean, I guess the example that I always use is that I was asked to write the commencement speech for the Lame Deer High School up in the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. And I wrote the speech, and then they told me when it was, and I wasn't able to deliver it because I wasn't going to be in town. I had a book tour that I had to be doing, and they don't change the dates on those book tours, for anything like that, And so I told them there wasn't any way that I could do it, and they were disappointed, and I was disappointed. And then I think it was like maybe a week later, I was down in Santa Fe while they were filming Longmire, and Lou Diamond Phillips came up to me, like, and Lou's first question always is, "What's going on the res?" And I said, "Well, I wrote this speech, for the commencement, for the high school there in Lame Deer, but I'm not going to be able to be there to deliver the speech." And he looked at me without a pause, not even a second, and said, "When is it?" And he booked a flight and a rental car and flew up to Billings, Montana, jumped in the rental car, drove down to Lame Deer, Montana, and delivered that commencement speech for me. They had the largest crowd they've ever had for a commencement speech at Lame Deer High School. If I'd have been there, there would have been 20 people like that. But Lou shows up and there were like 2,000 like it. And so it was pretty amazing. And it just kind of gives you a little bit of an indication of the kind of relationship that we had, with or have, more importantly, with both reservations like that. I mean, we brought down dance troops, from, the Northern Cheyenne to be in the TV show. I mean, it's just, they're an amazing people like that. And if I, wasn't able to utilize them, to be in the books, then the books would be lacking, in many, many ways. But the biggest one being that I wouldn't be giving you an accurate representation of the place where I live. Mm-hmm. There's such a major part of that would be sad if I didn't have that.
That makes sense. So I'm curious, you wrote I thought a very touching piece right around the time of the beginning of the television show about you kind of watching the show take shape and how, how strong your emotions were as you began to watch some of that stuff leap off the page into the show. Uh-huh. I'm very curious. And so that's, that's the positive side of it. Was there anything that in the show where you wanted to try to veto it, or, you really opposed it, that person wouldn't do that, that kind of thing?
Well, there were obviously there were a lot of things. I mean, after you've, assembled a world and populated it with characters and everything, after about, 7 or 8 years, you have very strong feelings about how everything should be done. But I also think that it would be a big mistake, to enter into a relationship, with producers and directors and an agency like that in a studio and all of that, and then turn around and try and tell all of them how they should do a TV show when you're a cowboy from a town of 25. Maybe, there's every once in a while, the example I always use is, in a lot of ways, it was kind of like running a ranch. I mean, what you do is you get the very best people that you can get, and then you do the hardest thing in the world. Leave them alone. Let them do what it is they do and what it is that they're so good at. I was fortunate enough that the people that I partnered up with, Greer Shepard and Hunt Baldwin, John Coveney, and a good group of people, they had track records. They had marvelous, marvelous track records of all of these shows that they had done. The actors were incredible. The directors, were just stupendous. And so I was very, very fortunate to get in with a good group, and then smart enough to keep my mouth shut an awful lot of the time. Now, did that mean that there were things that I disagreed with and things that I voiced with them? Yeah, of course there were. They were wonderful about giving me the opportunity to say things like that, about the things that I felt strongly about. And sometimes they would change things. Sometimes they would, change things around and do things the way that I saw fit. And then the other times they would explain to me why it was, exactly that they were doing the things that they were doing. And that makes for a pretty good working relationship. And so I have to admit that I had no complaints after 6 years of working, with the group. They were great to work with.
I want to
Okay.
ask
Oh,
a
go
question
ahead, Pete.
on that, a follow up, because we've had Tony Toast on the show a couple of times. And
Uh-huh.
Tony was, I'll just say, a nobody when he first started writing for the show, and then all of a sudden, because he got your world so well, because he grew up in the same kind of world, he worked at a pickle factory at one point. He seems to be able to pull out what you did because he grew up on American land right next to a reservation. What are your thoughts on Tony? And then you guys are inexorably tied now, right? Like your books gave him a platform to express himself, and he's a PhD level writer. And then his writing and making the show what it was also helps you sell books. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, you try not to have favorites, of course, like that, because all the writers on the show, we had a lot of writers on the show like that. And, but Tony would always, I could tell, I wouldn't even have to look at the title page of an episode, whenever I would see one of Tony's scripts. One of the things that Tony did, he read the books. He read the books very carefully, and he got the books. He knew what it was that I was trying to do. And he knew how to translate that. Because being a television writer, being a screenplay writer or a teleplay writer or whatever, that's a specialty that takes a certain amount of skill. I like to think that the novels that I write work on a very visual medium. I mean, one of my greatest heroes in the literary sense is John Steinbeck. I think that everything he ever wrote, you could look at, and if he wrote a grocery list, they made a movie out of it, just simply because it was so visually arresting and so easy to adapt like that. And so I would hope that mine gave Tony a leg like that to be able to do that like that. But I think a lot of it kind of rested with Tony's own abilities like that to be able to make that kind of a transition. It's like the books have been translated into 20 some languages like that. And what I've learned is that, with foreign languages, you're kind of at the mercy of your translator. If you get a good translator, you get a good book in another language. And I think it's the same thing with Hollywood. If you get a good screenwriter like that, then they're going to do a good job with your material and you're going to get a good show. And everybody wants a good show.
And as a follow-up, I'm curious, and then I'll let Hunter ask some more questions again. I promised I wouldn't ask too many. The Old West is so rich with stories that haven't been told and everything. I mean, and then there's a lot of books from characters that we know, like the disagreement between a Sheriff Behan and a Wyatt Earp, and who's right and who's wrong. They're both evil characters. They're both heroes and everything. You got a guy like Powhatan Clark, who basically nobody knows about, but he wins a Medal of Honor in the Indian Wars in Arizona. How much do you look to that part of history, because it does relate to your stories? I mean, maybe you got to bring them into modern times, but there's a lot of richness there. Do you dive into that at all?
Oh yeah, no, I think you if you're going to write about a place that's that's as specific as the American West, you have to have the continuity, and you have to have the context, of what it is that you're writing about. Just simply, so that the characters can be knowledgeable, in these situations. I think that's kind of important. And then, there's that high context kind of relationship that you're going to have not only with the viewers, but also the readers, where they know that information. They've read that information and so, you better know that information too. I mean, one of the books that I just had come out last year was The Next to Last Stand, which had an awful lot to do with the Battle of the Little Bighorn, which happened about 90 miles, up the road here from where my ranch is. And it's always been, kind of a rabbit hole that I have resisted, simply because there are certain facets of Western history that can really become black holes that you can disappear in, and once you start doing the research, you don't ever come back, and I kind of avoided, the Little Bighorn to a certain extent, just because I had seen so many writers who had disappeared, into that, and but I thought, okay, if I could find some sort of an angle, if I could find some way, to approach that, in a different way like that would illuminate it in a different way like that. And then I stumbled onto a lecture that that was done that was called that was about Cassilia Adams's painting Custer's last fight, and discovered that painting, had been painted about 10 years after the fact, and that it had been destroyed in a fire in Fort Bliss, and just how much drama there was, connected with that painting. I thought, okay, well, maybe that's, the access point, to that piece of history. So in answer to your question, I would say absolutely. I mean, it's important to have that information in there, but then the big question becomes, okay, what's your angle going to be? I mean, you don't want to just turn around and regurgitate, all of that, history again, because if somebody wants to read that, there are numerous nonfiction books out there. Nathaniel Philbrick's The Last Stand is, going to be hard to go up against, in a novel like it. And so you just kind of have to find something new to say about it, or a new angle to take with it to make it interesting and make it worthwhile.
You mentioned in the course of one of these two previous answers, Greer Shepherd. And one of the things that you said in another venue about, I want to say it was her who asked you whether you thought Walt was verbose. And I think that you answered that sure he was, but then you went back and looked at it. And actually, he doesn't say that much, that most of it's going on, inside his mind.
Right. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. That I think you did a better portrayal of that conversation than I've ever done. I, in all honesty, yeah. I mean, there are two Walts. There's the Walt that goes inside Walt's head, and then there's the Walt that gets spoken like that. And so I never really thought of Walt as being one of those quintessential, strong, silent types like that. But then I started looking and seeing that, yeah, there is an awful lot of the time where he'll think, for a page, before he says one sentence like it. And so, when you're reading the books, since they're in first person, you're obviously in Walt's head, for that period in time like it. And so it was easy for me to kind of mistakenly think that, he was a lot more verbose, like it, and a lot more verbal than he actually is. Like it, he's a very lucid, very intelligent, an insightful individual, but he does play his cards a little bit close to the vest. I mean, he's one of those guys that would just as soon you think that he's just a dumb cowboy. Because it gives him an advantage an awful lot of the time, especially in investigations when he's up against, some cagey people that be might trying to, pull the wool over his eyes like that. He'd rather have them underestimate him in many ways like that. But, that generally doesn't work out for people when they do. So,
yeah. Well, and, actually, as I thought about it, I think that insight resolves the difference between Walt in the books and Walt on the screen a little bit. Right. Because the Walt on the screen, we don't have access to his thoughts. There aren't these narrative voiceovers, or anything like that. So you don't really know what's going on inside that guy's head.
Right. And they were actually, whenever they were first assembling the pilot episode of the TV show, there was a great deal of talk, about there being a voiceover. And they asked me what my opinion on that was. And I was like, I think that might be a mistake like that, because as wonderful as Robert's voice is like that, I think, one of the things you're doing at that point in time is you're kind of taking away from the actors. It's their job to interpret, and respond. And, you should be able to read on their faces the words, that are going on, in their heads, and so I actually voted against the narrative like it, and said, no, I don't think that we need a voiceover. I think it'll become tiresome after a period in time like it. And I think we're also robbing the actors of the job like it. So I think we should just let the actors act.
That would be the Wonder Years version of Longmire. Okay. Now, the other thing, so as thinking about this as well, I remember reading a review of one of the more recent books that struck me really as something interesting. The reviewer pointed out that Walt Longmire is good company for the reader, right? And I actually find that so I've been just personally going through kind of a tough stretch on some things. And I think about, so who would I like to be kind of in my mind right now? And Walt Longmire is a pretty good candidate for that. I mean, there's that, to use a word that we kind of use in the church, I find him edifying, right? What do you
Thank
think about
you.
that?
Oh my goodness, that's a $5 word there. Yeah, and and along those same lines, the term that I always use, which is probably only a $1 word, is decent. Um, I
Yes.
always I always basically, whenever anybody says what's the one word that you would use to describe Walt Longmire, I always say decent. And the problem, of course, is that it's not a very sexy word, in the current world. But it is something that we were all kind of brought up with. Our parents brought us up with this idea of, be a decent human being, treat people the way that you want to be treated yourself. There's a golden rule that we should be following like that, and be kind and look out for each other. All these things that make life, worth living. And I think that Walt, definitely, exemplifies, an awful lot of that. I mean, he's devoted, his life, to justice, and to taking care, of the people in his county. Whenever I was doing a lot of research and a lot of ride-alongs with a lot of Wyoming and Montana sheriffs, the one phrase that I would hear them using over and over again was "my people, my people." And I think that there's a connection between sheriffs, and their constituency that maybe is a little stronger than it is, say with a police detective, or a patrolman, or something like that. And that resides in the fact that these people voted for you. They've given you one of the most treasured things that they have, in a working democracy, their vote. And, people that would never walk into a police station in a million years will march right into a sheriff's office and knock on the desk and say, "Hey, there's a guy putting up a fence, next to me, and it's on my property by 3 feet, and you need to come out there and tell." I mean, they feel like there's a vested interest, and that they have a perfect right, to come in and hold that sheriff answerable like that. And then again, it's a two-way street. That sheriff feels like, well, these are my people. They're my neighbors, my friends, family. They're all around me. And I have a very unique responsibility to take care of them, or even take care of anybody who's a stranger that just happens to be passing through the county, area. It's just something that I think that Walt takes very, very seriously. And I think it gives him a benevolence. I think that kind of makes him attractive, as a character, but also as a voice. Because that's basically what you're going to have in a novel when you're reading. That voice is going to be in your head, and you better be very, very careful with that voice. A lot of the time when I'm teaching workshops, with a lot of younger writers, the biggest mistake that a lot of them make is that a lot of their characters sound an awful lot alike. They tend to have like one voice, for all 30 characters that tend to be in the novel, and I think that's a bit of a problem, just simply because you only get one chance to describe a character. That's what I always tell them. You get one chance to describe a character physically, one time. And if you're writing a series of books, you're not going to be able to describe that character over and over and over again. Even you're going to have to describe them basically in that first book and then give a light description later on. But that character is going to speak all the way through all of those novels. And so if you're going to look for a spot to try and find differentiation, look at the voice. Look at the voice of that character and see if you can find something about that will make them unique, and something that will stay in the reader's mind.
Did you conceive of him as a kind of a moral exemplar, kind of a magnetic north, or did it just sort of happen that way as you told the stories?
I think it just kind of happened by accident, which
Yeah.
explains an awful lot of my process. I don't know if I'm proud of that or not, but yeah, I think a lot of times you do try and find that magnetic north like that, and then you follow it and see where it goes. And I think for me, an awful lot of the guys that I met, doing the job. Were really good people, just really good people working very, very hard in very, very difficult situations, to try and help people. Their motivations for being, in law enforcement, were because they were out there trying to help people, trying to do some good, trying to solve problems like that and make the world a better place. And so, for me to write about an alcoholic, divorced, detective in a big city or something, that was, mixing up methamphetamines in a bathtub or something like that really would have been a problem for me. I can write those bad characters, but to carry that voice, for 350 or 400 pages, that would be a little bit difficult for me to try and get away with.
Connected to that, Walt gets into situations. Well, you put him there, right? Walt ends up in these situations where in a lot of the genre fiction, you would expect somebody to be very vengeful, right? I mean, in fact, a lot of the genre fiction is about kind of indulging that revenge.
Yeah.
That's sometimes that's the thing you're looking for, right? You know, somebody does something terrible and you want the avenger to take care of it. But it seems to me that Walt actually has a very merciful streak. And he is not really looking to deal out payback.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. I think, Walt knows, what are the higher levels, of his nature, like at one of the more base, levels of his nature, and it's very easy to fall into that, revenge, kind of scenario. I mean, you see so much of it, not only in crime fiction like that, but also in Westerns. I mean, there's so many Westerns. I think I just got the magazine, the Roundup magazine, from Western Writers Association, like that, and they've got a whole big article about revenge stories, in there, like that, and so many of the quintessential, Westerns that have been, filmed or written, have to do with that, like that, and I guess, I mean, I can see how that's, a very powerful motivation, for the characters, and implies a great deal of power, to a storyline. But once again, it's also a little cheap. I mean, it's very easy to fall into those base natures and, to go after them, and follow them. But, are you really showing something good about human nature? Are you really showing something, of our, as Abraham Lincoln used to call the better angels, of our natures? Are you really, showing some of that, and, I can't say that, I haven't ever written, and glancing, had some glancing blows, off that particular type of genre like that, but it's never really been a through line for me. It's just a little bit too easy, to be honest. Like I'd rather look for something maybe a little bit more complex. And then, whenever Walt goes up against these individuals, I try not to have white hats and black hats. I try to have gray hats, ones that are somewhere in between, like that, where the good guys are not completely good and the bad guys are not completely bad, like that, because those are those gray areas to me that are infinitely more interesting, like that, than just, some sort of, melodrama like that, where we've got bad guys twirling their mustaches and, white hat guys like that, jumping on their stallions and riding off into the sunset.
There's no Jacob Nighthorse in these stories.
I want to ask about the voice that you have too, because you're writing. We have this in the nation. We have this crazy thing where we have these hyper urban areas. New York City is almost the antithesis of where you live with this 25 people, and you're not even on interstate, right?
No,
your judge. These guys have to judge and sheriff in different ways. I mean, whoever the county sheriff is for New York City, it's all procedural, right? And it's political. Where you guys are, you might have to look the other way while a kid sorts through some things and the community does things. It's a completely different way. But that doesn't mean we understand it because it's beyond rural, right? Like where you are, it's expansive. How do you help us get through when you do something that's really Wyoming-ish, right? Like when it's really, like saying Ranier instead of Rainier, whatever. By the way, I live on the corner of Ranier and Olympia. So the kings of bad Washington beer. How do you explain, or how do you get us to make the leap with you when something gets really, really expansive and not even 1 million people live in Wyoming, right? So
no.
How do you help us understand that cultural gap?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of different things you can do. Look at, I mean, obviously, if you're dealing with a high context, kind of situation, I mean, you do have to find some way, to get that information across. Like that, and 9 times out of 10, I can get Walt, to really kind of get it across like that, because we are kind of viewing this world through his eyes. Like at the difficulty being that, Walt was born here, he grew up here. He did go away, to go to college, like had fought in the war. Had experiences, up in Alaska, and all of these things before he finally came back and became a deputy in Absoroka County, and then finally the sheriff here. But then again, also, it's just another one of those things where, you have to be very careful about how it is that you cast your novel. You always have to try and have an ensemble of characters, it seems to me. I mean, I would find it tiresome if all I could do was like write about Walt, only Walt, and all about Walt and all of that. So for me, as you mentioned, Henry is such an important part of the books. Vic is such an important part of the books. And the reason why Vic is such an important part of the books is what you just now mentioned. She was born in Philadelphia, grew up in Philadelphia. She's an Easterner. She's an urbanite. She's not Wyoming. And so if I ever find myself in a situation, where I have to kind of do a little bit of an explanation as to, why this is the case or what this is really meaning or anything like that, all I have to do is make sure that Vic is in the room who will go, what the hell does that mean anyway? And so, and that provides another voice, that's that ensemble of voices that I think is so important whenever you're casting a novel, when you're sitting down and thinking about, what the construction of this novel is going to be. And it's like basically what I refer to it as. It's almost like conducting a choral group in many ways. It's going back to those voices. Once again, the physical appearance is not that important like that, but where are those voices coming from, and what are they having to say, and what kind of an advantage are they going to have in telling this particular story? And so you have to sit down and think about that. And so it's almost like doing a choral group. You assemble them all together and see where the strengths are in this particular piece, and then who it is that you're going to utilize, to be able to tell that story.
Now, I have to choose my questions carefully now because we're drawing, kind of toward the end. So I have to not miss the ones that are really important. And
okay.
And so here's one.
Okay.
So I think about one of the books. Maybe it's Hell is Empty. I'm not sure, where Dante's Inferno is part of the. Was that Hell is Empty? Okay.
That was Hell is Empty. Yep.
And so one thing that occurs to me is that sometimes I look at Walt, and he makes references to old books. He seems to be unusually well read for sort of the type of Western man of action that he is. And so I kind of wonder, like, for you, is Walt some kind of a last man of the tradition of the humane arts and letters, right? The typical action hero type person, or even detectives, they're not often presented as a person nourished by the liberal arts. So you see my professor side coming out, right?
I do.
But I see that with Walt.
I don't know.
It seems like you care about that.
$5 words. I don't know. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And yes, he does harken back to one of the mistakes I think an awful lot of people make, whenever they think about the Old West, is thinking that everybody was illiterate and nobody read anything or anything like that. I got a sneaking suspicion they read more than most people do nowadays, to be honest. In many ways like that. The example that I always use is, guess what the most referenced book in Louis L'Amour's books is that most cowboys are reading? It's Plutarch's Lives, and
wow.
So, wow. I think these guys were a lot more well-read than you might suspect. And one of the traditions in the Old West was to winter up. Whenever you'd winter up, and the seasons get bad, and it'd get 40 degrees below zero and the wind would be blowing 50 miles an hour you'd have to find a good place, and hopefully with some female companionship to, settle in somewhere for a couple of months And one of the things you took with you was a great big stack of books, mail order books that were a huge item and free libraries There's so many saloons, that actually had shelves of books that these cowboys, would literally check out, and take with them, for a month as they would go winter up. So yeah, I think absolutely there's a quality to that. And then in all honesty too, it's one of those things where I thought to myself, okay, Walt's not a superhero, he's not going to be wearing tights and have a cape and all that. So, the two secret weapons that I gave him was the one that you already mentioned, which was a sense of humor. I think that's one of his truly superly heroic aspects of his character. The other one is he reads everything and he remembers all of it, and that makes him extraordinarily formidable to go up against. Because those of us who read, we all, it's kind of a special club that we have that, because we're the only ones that know just how much your life is enhanced by reading that, and how much you get, out of that. And, I also found that, an amazing thing happened. suddenly readers had this bond with Walt, because he was one of them. He read, and so they had this connection to him, and so all the way around it became kind of a wonderful thing, to develop that character and make him, more multidimensional like that. And then it gave me more opportunities to make more allusions, to the literary world, like that, and to Walt's education. I mean, he was an English major at USC, before he graduated, lost his deferment, and got shipped off to Vietnam. I mean, his office is an old Carnegie library that's been transferred over into being, a sheriff's office, like it. And so, Walt is haunted by books. Walt is haunted by reading, like that, and it seems to be something that readers really respond to, which I really enjoy, I have to admit.
I love the mention of the Carnegie Library. I tell students about that every time I get a chance. In fact, Carnegie, if a city had segregated libraries, he would give the library to the African American side of town. But such fabulous philanthropy, right?
Absolutely.
Now,
and not only in the United States, but all over the world, for goodness sake.
I didn't know that. That's
amazing. Oh, they're all over the place. I mean, he built one. It was originally from Scotland, like it. So of course, there's a number of them in Scotland. But there was also, every time that some town would like lose their library, in Reims in France, like that, they lost their library from bombing in World War I, and he came in and built them the most spectacular library I've ever seen, with this dome in the entryway where you walk in, and there are bubbles all on the entryway as you go in. And the reason for that is that the major export out of Reims is champagne. And it just was marvelous, like to see like that, and that kind of philanthropic endeavor is much needed even today.
That's brilliant. Well, okay, so sort of related. That's Walt, as a literary man, he has both sides of the Western tradition. He has the sort of the Christian side and the Greco-Roman side, right? And so elsewhere, I saw you refer to Walt as sort of an unbeliever and an empiricist, right? And also maybe kind of a stoic, right?
I think you're right on target there.
Okay,
a very good description, I think.
And so with all that, so here's the interesting thing that plays with that, is that on the other hand, and maybe this is again, Hell is Empty, but maybe also elsewhere, there's a very powerful spiritual world in these books, right? And I think it tends to emanate from the Indian/Native American side of things. Where is Walt in all of that, right? I mean, are we to understand him? Is he interacting with that world? Is this something that's just in his subconscious? What's happening there?
Well, that kind of goes back to, also to one of the earlier questions you had about that relationship between Walt and Henry. One of the major differences between them is that Henry is a very spiritual individual, like an awful lot of the natives that I know, my good friends, they're not Sunday morning spiritualists. Like it's very much a part of their day-to-day life and the way that they see everything around them. It's truly amazing, like that. And Walt, on the other hand, he's a detective, he's an investigator, and so his world is anchored in the reality and in fact. I mean, I can't help but think that I always hear Joe Friday, nothing but the facts, ma'am, nothing but the facts. But for Walt, anything that gets in the way of those facts is something that's not of an empiric nature, like that he really can't tolerate. He really, he has to kind of push it off like at an arm's length. And one of the joys, for me in writing the books is that relationship between Walt and Henry, where, boy, they do not see eye to eye in that at all, like that. I mean, Henry is able to poke holes, in Walt's absolute disbelief, like that. And of course, Walt's able to poke holes, in Henry's belief, and all of these things. And so, once again, it's another one of those conflicts, I think between the characters that is very, very interesting, but as much as Walt would like to dismiss, everything, it just seems like, the powers that be that, that seem to be just out of the corner of your eye or just over the horizon, or they continue to crowd in on him and have an effect on his life like that. And it makes it more and more difficult for him to, completely dismiss them.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm struggling not to just kind of go all fanboy about this stuff because I love it. I do. I love the world in these books so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Boy out.
Yeah.
Something else I want to say is that, and maybe you'll tell me I'm wrong. I cannot discern a formula in these books, right? So for instance, and I'm not attacking formulas like Columbo. Columbo has a very reliable formula, right? And people love it. But a lot of times formulas can be terrible, like the Dukes of Hazzard or something like that. You don't seem to have a formula as far as I can tell. It seems to every story seems kind of original to me in that sense.
Well, thank you, first of all. Like that's very flattering. Like I don't know. I I'm not a big one for formula. I think that when everybody signs up, to read one of my books, like that, they know that it's probably not going to be like one of the previous books. One of my favorite emails to write is when somebody writes me and says, "I really didn't like your last book," and I love writing them back and going, "Yeah, but don't worry, the next one will be completely different." Like, and so you don't have to worry about that. But I think I would have a hard time coming up with a formula. I think that I always go with the idea of well, what is this book about, and what is the message of this book, and then what kind of an effect is it going to have on the characters? What kind of an effect is it going to have on Walt? All of those things like it. And so when I start thinking about those things, the trajectory for each book is going to be so different. I would have a hard time coming up with a formula, to be honest. Like the only formula that I have for the books is I have the books, end the same way they start. I have a kind of a cyclical thing that I like to do, which is kind of a bookends in many ways. In the most recent book, Daughter of the Morning Star, it's Walt is helping Jaya along like that as she's shooting baskets and he's feeding her the ball back. That's the way the book starts. That's the way the book ends. The Cold Dish, the very first book that I ever wrote, the very first book in the Walt Longmire series. It starts with Walt, looking out his window and watching the Canada geese, as they're flying south, and at the end of the book, Walt's watching the geese as they fly south, so I kind of like to have that cyclical pattern, just as a point, a point of a beginning and a point of an end, just to give that cyclical, process, and then also give just a little bit of reassurance, to the reader, that this world is going to continue on. And that Walt's back, where he was, like it, and we'll be moving on with this world.
Yeah, I'm good. I think this might be the last question I have. Pete can tell me, but I one thing I encountered as I was kind of studying your story a little bit is this moving out to Wyoming. Now you're from West Virginia, right? Not the big city or something, but you move all the way out to Wyoming with this kit to build a log cabin that you ordered, and you talk about how the logs are not even numbered, right?
Right.
And you have instructions for how to put this thing together, which to me, I'm completely overwhelmed by this. I was telling my wife about it and she's like, "Wow, that sounds amazing." She loved the idea. How did this, to me, this is the creation story of Craig Johnson, the writer. How did this come about that you decide to build this log cabin in Wyoming, and do this thing?
Well, my grandfather had built his place. My father had built his, like, and my father also thought you were slave labor until you finally escaped, like it. And so I was forced into learning how to do basic construction, like it, and electric and plumbing and all these different things like that. And I carried that with me. And it was kind of handy like that because, as I worked as a cowboy, like that, my grandfather was a blacksmith, and I always knew that, that I would be out West. I knew that was where I was headed. And what I discovered was as a working cowboy, if you also could do some carpentry work, that gave you an advantage like that. They were more likely to keep you on through the winter if you could actually do some construction work around the ranch like that. And so I kind of honed my skills as far as that was concerned, just all over the upper high plains like out of Montana and Wyoming and Colorado. And over a period of time like that, I decided that, I really love the area here in Ucross, Wyoming. up here in north central Wyoming, right here at the base of the Bighorn Mountains. It's right where the Clear and Piney Creeks runs in together. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful area, kind of sparsely populated like that. But, for a writer, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And so, I thought, okay, well, maybe this is where it is that I'll build my ranch. Well, then I came to a horrifying realization, which is they don't give you land, you have to buy it. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna have to save up some money, I guess, like that. And so started saving like that and got enough money scratched together like that to be able to buy this plot of land like that, and got started building like that. And the first thing to build, of course, was something with some doors and windows in it, because it's about 19 degrees outside right now, which gives you an indication like that you need a little bit of heat, maybe to make it through the winter here in Wyoming. And built the part that I'm speaking in now in our kitchen like that, which was a little 24 by 32 log cabin like that. And the thing I learned is that anything you fine tune, with a chainsaw, I'd probably do that. Like that seems like right down my alley. And I think that, it was also good for me because it was also maybe one of the first projects that I came up against that took longer than a 3-day weekend. This was going to be a process. When you're building something like that alone, the weeks can kind of stretch out, the months can kind of stretch out, and continued, to stretch out like that, because I built the whole ranch myself over the years, and it was good for me because, writing is the same thing like that, thinking that you're going to write a novel, you go into it thinking, oh, I'll just knock this out in a couple of months and I'll be done like that. Yeah, generally, if it's something worth reading, it might take a little bit more time than that. And I think that, the patience factor that I learned, in construction was probably good for me as far as like, developing the mindset that you kind of need to be able to write. It also gave me a lot of time to think, as I was stacking those logs and pouring that concrete and doing all those things. I kind of assembled that world of Absoroka County and that world of Walt Longmire and kind of put it all together. And I think it served me well, over the years, to be honest.
One thing that I really love about this is that you have connection to a place. A lot of Americans now, and I think I'm in this group. We can kind of go anywhere that has Target and Walmart, Home Depot, Lowe's, a few chain restaurants, and hey, it's all settled. Just kind of plug me in like a Lego, and then I'll live my life. But you have this place, right? And you're connected to it through your labor. That's like John Locke, right? The way we get property is we mix our labor with it, and that's what you did. And now you have this connection to a place, and it's so fantastic about it. It nourishes your work. I mean, it has borne fruit.
Oh yeah,
through this Longmire verse, or whatever, that's turned out so well, and that people like me have enjoyed so much.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Like, I think you're absolutely right in the sense that up until like as a young man, like I was traveling. I don't think I lived in the same place for like one full year. I was traveling around working at a lot of different ranches and a lot of different places like that. And, I like to look back and think to myself, oh, that was good training for being a writer. That was important. I had that planned. Yeah, I don't think that was the case like that. But nonetheless, the fallout from it, became that, I met an awful lot of people, lived in an awful lot of different places, doing an awful lot of different things. And then, I really kind of had to invest, by building the ranch. And that definitely settled me in. Because I can't even imagine, living anywhere else or being anywhere else. I mean, I love traveling. I love going out, and we just got an invitation to the Los Angeles Book Festival, and I'm doing the Tucson Book Festival in March. And I've probably got another European tour that I'm going to be doing in April, like that, and that's very handy in keeping my wife, like it also, like when I can take her to Paris and I can take her to Los Angeles and New York and all those type of places, like that. It makes it a little bit easier to hold on to her. Whereas if she were stuck here just listening to me read my own books, I don't know if that would go over all well or not. but yeah, and it's always nice, I think, for both of us, to come back and to come home. I mean, this is where it all takes place, like, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.
We wouldn't trade it either. This has been an awesome chat. I want to let everybody know, go to Amazon, that little link right there, or just go to Amazon and get the book, Daughter of the Morning Star. It's available. It's highly rated. It's Craig. So, of course, you're going to love it. Come on. I mean, Hunter already has it. I've already ordered it with my monthly Audible subscription. You guys definitely can support Craig by doing that. You can also learn about where Craig's going to be speaking and where he's going to be at by going to his website, CraigAllenJohnson.com. Everything is there. Anything in closing at all, Hunter? And then anything in closing after that for you, Craig? Go ahead, Hunter.
I think I've covered what I have to say, other than to say that I really urge readers to journey into this world, because it's not only going to entertain you, but it's going to make you more thoughtful. And like I say, it's going to edify you a little bit morally to sort of interact with Walt Longmire. He's the best imaginary friend you can have.
Thank you so much. No, I mean, that's the mark of a really great interview. Look at, when you can't think of anything to add at the end. The only thing I'm doing now is I've got like about 12 libraries that I'm doing in about a tri-county area here in northern Wyoming and in Montana, where I'm going to be reading this year's Walt Longmire short story. I've made a tradition over the last 17 years to write a Walt Longmire Christmas short story that I send out to folks. And one of the ways that you can get that is, of course, by going to CraigAllenJohnson.com and then signing up for the Post-it newsletter. And then you'll receive the short story in your inbox on Christmas morning. And believe me, I won't overload your inbox. You're lucky if you get 6 emails from me a year, one of them being that short story.
All right, stand by, fellas. Let me wrap this thing up.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for